Hi everybody, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Rob Downey. I'm a family practice physician here at SVT. I'm also the medical director. I'm a board certified family practice MD, and I also have about 8 years of experience and training with a natural medicine approach called functional medicine that's recognized by the American Medical Association. This is a joint presentation tonight. I've deliberately put a clinical superhero up because Dr. Daily will be doing much of the heavy lifting. Dr. Daily is a naturopathic doctor who many of you know. Those of you who don't, or who like a revisitation to her credentials, trained in Bastyr, has many skills, also is a Chinese medicine acupuncturist. And she goes back a long way with the laboratory that we'll be talking about tonight, a laboratory called Genova Labs. They used to be called Great Smokies. So the presentation tonight will start with just a brief introduction from me about the laboratory itself, and the particular test in question will be a metabolic test called the NutrEval. And then I'll mention, for folks that might be interested, kind of a variety of cost schemes between $0 if you have Medicare up to around $2,000 if you're paying out of pocket with no support whatsoever. And then Dr. Daly will take over and give people some specifics in case they are interested in the test, what they should know about how to contact the lab and what it might or might not cost. And also then Dr. Daly will actually walk through the lab itself extensively, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for question and answer about what the lab means and what you might be interested in. So the test that we'll be talking about is called the NutrEval, and it comes from a lab named Genova, and they are based in North Carolina. And this laboratory grew up with this natural medicine approach, which is called functional medicine. And I won't go into functional medicine too much tonight, other than to mention that it's scientifically based, and it's a broad, integrative approach to a variety of clinical problems. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can go to functionalmedicine.org. So envision, if you will, over the last 25 or 30 years, you have these healers around the country and patients, and they're saying to one another and to the labs that are trying to achieve these goals, hey, we need to know about this, we need to know about that. We're trying to figure out if people have gut parasites as part of their trouble. We're trying to figure out if they have enough B vitamins. And the tests that we have available already aren't telling us the information we need. As you can imagine, certain labs are going to sort of rise to the occasion, and Genova then grew up with functional medicine over the last 25 to 30 years, with laboratory scientists saying, well, here's the data on this kind of information. Would you like to have that information? How can we test it? So the test we'll be discussing is what's called a functional test, and it looks at whether or not you have enough B vitamins, the levels of amino acids in your body, organic acids, minerals, etc. And what I mean by a functional test is a blood and urine specimen is submitted to Genova. The person who's interested actually just sends the, with our help to collect the blood, sends the kit into Genova. And what they send back nearly, 2-3 weeks later, quite a bit of turnaround time. What they send back is this 25-page report that we'll be going through tonight. So make sure you're comfortable. We got a ways to go till the finish line. And the test, let's say we're talking about a B vitamin, let's say we're talking about B6. The test doesn't come back and say, here's your B6 blood level. What the test does is it comes back and says, well, here's something that's in your body, and then B6 takes that thing and it makes it into something else. So if you got a whole bunch of this stuff piled up, and here's the B6 step, and then there's hardly any of this stuff over here, functionally, you need more B6. And the reason this matters is that the idea that you can just do a blood test or do a urine test and look at just the levels alone of B vitamins or what have you, and that's going to tell you everything you need to know, that doesn't really hold up, because people vary based on their age, their health, whether they're stressed or not, their genetic hand that they've been dealt, and different individuals need more or less B6. So the advantage to functional testing is we're able to say, we know that everybody needs to take care of all of these physiologic hurdles where they make this thing into that thing, and that can be sort of normalized or standardized, and that's what the functional medicine folks and the Genova lab have done over the years, is come up with algorithms or strategies to figure out how much of this stuff you ought to have around. And so this is Genova's summary of what the test looks at. It looks at antioxidants down at the left at the one location. And again, these are all functional tests, so they're not necessarily checking how much vitamin A and carotenoids are around, but things that come before and after or are affected by vitamin A and carotenoids. And categorically, that's in the area of antioxidants. In brief, why does oxidation matter? Why do antioxidants matter? You can imagine that within your body, you have to take care of making energy and getting other things done via oxidation, but that's also kind of hard on your system. So when you see something that's rusted, the body's equivalent of that, of things sort of breaking down in the face of oxidative stress, is a way to think about what can sort of go wrong when undue oxidative effects can't be quenched. And so antioxidants matter, and they get a lot of attention in the media. B vitamins help with mood and energy and all kinds of other important things in terms of being healthy and vital. So this test looks at whether or not people have adequate B vitamin levels. Item 3, minerals. This test functionally evaluates whether or not people have adequate amounts of minerals, and also does some specific red blood cell testing for how many minerals the person's been exposed to over a recent period of days. Essential fatty acids. Most of you are familiar with omega-3 fatty acid as an important supplement. There's actually a whole group of essential fatty acids that achieve things that our bodies need to take care of and achieve, and omega-3 amounts relative to other amounts and other critical essential fatty acids are evaluated by this test. And then finally, digestion is critical to health and vitality, and this test looks for markers of whether or not people have adequate amounts of pancreatic digestive enzyme made and released by the pancreas, and also markers for whether or not the person has plenty of healthy, desirable bacteria in the gut doing its thing. So I guess as a segue into Dr. Daly's portion of the presentation, I should mention to you, it's super important for everyone here to be aware, SVT Health and Wellness is not connected to this lab. So patients who use this lab have an independent relationship with the laboratory. Your insurance company, if you were to elect to use your insurance to get this lab, has a relationship with Genova, not SVT. We now, in the past, in the future, will never receive a penny from Genova. We do not have a business relationship with them. We have a professional relationship with them because they do about 90% of the integrative and holistic medicine testing that we do at SVT Health and Wellness. And the reason that it's so important that I emphasize this is I would feel terrible if somebody went home and said, you know, that kind of felt like they were pitching that lab, you know, to make money for SVT. And I just want you to know that is not the case. I also need for you to know that this type of testing can't be done at your local hospital. And that's not a criticism of your local hospital. It's just that the the local laboratories are not set up for, they are not prepared for, they are not in a position to do this kind of testing. This is very, very specific testing with very specific equipment and people that care about it and have the expertise to get this kind of work done. So it would be great if the local hospital could do it, but it's just not the state of affairs. So the reason we kind of thought it'd be neat to get the word out is basically the NutrEval test addresses the question of what supplements might I benefit from, or what food sources should I go to for B vitamins or essential fatty acids. But the test looks at what do I need that I don't have now to be really vital and healthy. And as some of us were chatting, we said, you know what's remarkable, in a really frustrating era for a lot of patients and their relationship with their insurance company, Medicare covers every single penny of this test. And a lot of the people who would like this information are over 65. So the fact that you can have the test done, and that, again, the test out of pocket I think is now $1,900. So if you didn't do the prepay and you're Bill Gates and you just say, oh, here's the check, Genova, I just want a NutrEval, it's about a $1,900 metabolic test. As Dr. Daly will educate you, then there's everything in between. There's sort of a pay-assured plan where you pay a little and your insurer covers the rest. So without further ado, super clinician Hillery Daily.
All right, so first I'm just going to talk about the cost of the test and how, how the finances might be taken care of with it, because like Dr. Downey was saying, it is quite a spendy test, but there are ways to hopefully have it be affordable. So what Genova has done over the years, and by the way, I actually went to school with the man who started this lab, so I knew it before it actually was a lab. So what Genova has done over the course of time is they've decided that they want some of their more comprehensive, more expensive, and more popular labs to be available to a wide array of people. So because many of these have lots of steps in them and lots of individual tests, they cost a lot of money because each of those tests has a cost that goes along with it. So what they did is they put together a package for popular tests and came up with what they call, now it's called the Easy Pay, but it was originally called the Pay Assured test, which is if everybody who's got insurance pays X amount of money, which is relatively nominal compared to the cost of the test, if everybody does that, then different insurance companies pay different amounts towards the test. Some insurance companies pay nothing. Some insurance companies pay in full. So when they receive all those monies, it's enough to pay for the cost of the test for everybody, including those whose insurance companies don't pay anything or don't pay much of anything. So it's a way just to sort of even it out so that it's available at this pay assured amount. And what the pay assured amount means is that if you have an insurance that will cover this test, which is almost all insurances, there's a few exceptions, I'll tell you what those are, but if you have an insurance that will pay for a medically necessary test, and we can make this medically necessary, if you have a correct diagnosis, it can be medically necessary, is that you pay ahead $159, so everybody with insurance has to pay that. Now this is not Medicare. But this is everybody with insurance pays ahead $159, and then you don't have to pay any more money towards this test. That's it. The money has to go in with the test, and then you are assured that no matter what your insurance company pays or doesn't pay, that's it that you have to put forward. So the excluded insurances are Aetna, Humana, Principal, Tufts, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, and Blue Cross Blue Shield federal employees. Those are the only excluded insurance companies. The good news is that Genova has partnered with another lab called Metametrics, and Metametrics has a test that is almost exactly similar, and they do not exclude these insurances. So we have a backup plan for that. And then, like Dr. Downey said, Medicare pays for this entirely. There is no money up front whatsoever. This does, of course, have to be ordered by a medical doctor if Medicare is going to pay for it. Insurances that would pay For care with a naturopathic doctor, I could order this test, but insurances that don't pay for care of a naturopathic doctor, you'd need to have a medical doctor order it. The good news is at SVT, we coordinate, we work together, we can have a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner order this test, even if the patient happens to be seeing me, because we do share all that within house. So there is also one other option. So this is what they used to call it Pay Assured. Now they call it Easy Pay A, and then they also have Easy Pay B. And Easy Pay B is if you don't have Medicaid, if you don't have insurance, but you want to get this test, if you include a check for $803, and I know that's a lot of money, but you can get this test prepaid for $803. The list price is $1,987. So if you get billed for this test, it's almost $2,000. So there are those options, and then like I said, if you had one of those excluded insurances, we can actually use their sister lab who has a panel that's very, very similar to this. So any questions on that before I move on?
Last time you said Medicaid, did you mean Medicare?
I meant Medicare.
Okay.
I did need Medicare, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it has to go through an MD, not an ND?
It has to go through an MD. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, sort of addressing this issue of appropriateness versus drumming up business. One part of the equation that it's really important to be honest and forthright about is that it's a test that has clinical significance. So just to give you an example, if somebody says, "Hey doc, I'm tired. I just want you to order the test for me, but then I just want you to mail me the results. I can't come see you. I want the test done." It's understandable why a physician or just any caring human being might be tempted to do that. But medically, the reason you really shouldn't is that some people with fatigue just have some abnormalities imbalances that ought to be corrected via this test. Others of them might have rare conditions that don't have to do with these imbalances. And so to be forthright with everybody, if you want me to order the test, I should see you for that, to order the test and find out why you want it, get a diagnosis entered. It doesn't need to be much of a visit necessarily, but I at least need to know why you're interested. And then I could interpret the test for you at a follow-up visit, or Dr. Daly could. And physicians that aren't, or other healers that aren't familiar with this, if you just take it to your routine medical clinic, they'll either say, huh, if they're gracious, or they'll say, that looks like crap. If they feel like there isn't anything outside of the mainstream that's of utility. So anyway, I would need to see folks that want the test ordered just to find out, and also again for legitimacy purposes, so that we enter a diagnosis that actually correlates with what's going on with you. Fatigue is the slam dunk. If you think you have less energy than you ought to for your age and health, that I believe that diagnosis
It does. It does cover it.
The NutrEval. And then finally, again, I can interpret the test, or Dr. Daly can. Just so you know, we're trying to earn our keep if we interpret the test for you. We talk to Genova about your result before we meet with you, and it's typically a 1-hour visit to discuss the result, because it's about 15 pages and 200 or so total results all kind of incorporated together. You'll see that in just a moment here. And we talk to a doc at Genova that all he does is interpret these tests for clinicians. So by the time we present it to you, we've talked to Genova about what the findings mean. Yeah.
So you can do the test, or you can draw the blood here.
Yes, we do draw the blood here.
What's the difference between here and the hospital or another?
Oh, it's just that the kit is a hassle.
Oh.
It's got a freezer pack and a bunch of really specific nitpicky ways the tubes are drawn.
Okay.
And so unless you've cultivated St. Pat's in Missoula used to do this for my patients, and I had to give the lab director a bottle of whiskey and a box of chocolate.
Okay.
So anybody can do it, but they have to be game for it, because otherwise people show up with this box and this freezer bag and all these tubes and containers of pee, and the lab tech's like, what? Really?
Yeah, it's a very complicated draw. So you have to be, the person who does it has to be comfortable and kind of know ahead. In fact, even our MAs here will often pull out the cheat sheet and review how to do it before the person comes in, because it's so specific. Things need to be done in a certain order at a certain time. It needs to be frozen within 30 minutes. It needs to be spun down within 15 minutes. So, and it all has to be prepared exactly right in order for all these samples to come back with the right results.
Certainly the hospital could do it. It'd be lovely if they were interested. And again, if any of the clinicians who use the hospital ever are interested in learning how to interpret the result, you don't have to be a functional medicine doctor to have a relationship with Genovas. So there isn't any monopoly on this kind of testing. It just so happens right now that we're the only ones in town that are doing it.
Okay, so this is page 1 of what you'll get back. This all just comes from a sample report. This is what they look like. So one of the first things I want to say is, so this comes back with vitamin C and vitamin A and vitamin E and stuff like that, and a lot of people use supplements. So the question always comes up, should I take my supplements, should I not take my supplements? And that really depends on what question you're asking. If the question you're asking is, I'm on a supplement plan, I like it, it seems to work for me, can we test it and see if it really does, show up to work here on paper, besides working clinically? Then we have the person continue using their supplements and we test how their supplement plan seems to be working on a biochemical level for them. Other people who are on maybe a hit and miss plan, they just kind of put it together, they're not sure, it's an old plan, they don't know if it's really working for them, or they're not on a plan at all. Then we have them not take their supplements for a couple of weeks before they come in for this, and we measure them just as they are themselves without any supplements. And then the question is, what might you need in order to supplement your diet and your lifestyle, etc. So it can be done 2 different ways. The kid always says, stop using all your supplements, but sometimes we want to know, does this plan really work, on this biochemical level? So the first page comes back and it's color-coded. There is green for normal, and you'll see how vitamin C is normal for this patient. And what this is a need. This is the nutrient need. So the normal is a normal need. It doesn't mean you don't need any. It just means you need the normal amount, the standard average amount. And then under borderline are ones that would be needed at a little bit greater amount. And they're all listed there, and they're in categories, the antioxidants, the B vitamins, the minerals, and then in the red are the ones that there is a high need for the supplementation. And then if we go to page 2, we see the same thing here, it's just in a slightly different format, and they've divided it up into antioxidants, B vitamins, minerals. They added some new categories here, essential fatty acids, digestive support. And we'll see these columns again. There's that daily recommended level, that's the normal need. And then under the patient's daily recommendations, we see, and also the squares are color-coded, so they might be green or yellow or red, again, depending on what the lab has assessed the need to be and how much that person, that the lab interpretation assesses that the person might need. So those amounts are there, and then we have a third column so that your provider, when they go over it, they may or may not exactly agree with this. So they might use their clinical judgment and their knowledge of your history and your health to say something different that would be in column 2. So we've got all the different antioxidants, which are some vitamins that seem probably pretty familiar, plus alpha-lipoic acid and coenzyme Q10. All the B vitamins are listed. There are minerals. We'll get to a mineral page later, and there are some additional minerals, but these are the ones that are assayed specifically here. And then the omega-3 fatty acids, and like Dr. Downey said, there are other essential fatty acids, but this is the big one. So this is the one that shows up on this page. Digestive support, is there a need for probiotics? If so, how much? Is there a need for digestive enzymes, and if so, how much? Vitamin D is a possible add-on. It doesn't come in the panel. But on that Easy Pay A, it costs $5 to add a vitamin D, which is the cheapest vitamin D around. So you can pay $5 and get a vitamin D, and then we would have a need on there as well. And then the bottom part is amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, so the dietary proteins that we eat, or some people do supplement with a protein drink of sorts. So if there are any deficiencies, we would see the amount in milligrams a day of amino acids that people might supplement according to this plan. So then we go on to page 3 here, and this is again the same information, and again it's in a different form. This is in a bar graph form. So we see the antioxidants, we see what the need is on a bar graph, the X shows where it is, and then underneath what they have here, and this is really just for patient education. The first triangle there is the function. So what is the function of vitamin A? What is the function of vitamin E? What are the things that it would tend to do in the body? And this is just generic. This is in everybody's body. And then the next one, that kind of light orange colored one, is causes of deficiency. So why might the person have ended up with a greater than normal need? It's just some possibilities there. And then the complications of deficiency, so what sorts of disorders, functional disorders might that lead to in a person's body? And then the food sources, because we don't want to just do this with supplements, we want to do it with food too, so we can maximize these foods so that people can get these nutrients. So this goes through the antioxidants, and then this page goes through all those B vitamins, each B vitamin by itself, and you can see that each B vitamin gets its own individual score of need. And then on page 5 is the minerals, and we see those same minerals here: manganese, magnesium, molybdenum, and zinc. And when we look at the minerals, and actually we'll see this on a page here once we get a few pages ahead, the minerals are measured directly in the blood cells. So we actually get a mineral level, and then we get all these additional functional tests that tell us how well are the minerals working in the system. There's essential fatty acids, and then there's the 2 for digestive support, the pancreatic enzymes, and the need for probiotics. And all of these, again, are needs. These are the nutritional needs that are assessed by the results of this lab. Yeah, so this is a new category here. So up at the top it says functional imbalances. So prior to this page, we were looking at individual nutrients, vitamin C, manganese, an essential fatty acid, probiotic, individual nutrients. This is functions of the body. And so we call this test a functional test because it does measure some nutrients directly. But the beauty of this test is it measures how well the biochemical functions of the body are able to happen with all these nutritional cofactors. So we can actually take a bunch of these tests, put together what the results would be, and have a picture of, is there mitochondrial dysfunction? Is there a need for methylation? Is there toxic exposure? So mitochondria, if you remember from Biology 101, are the powerhouses of the cell. These are the guys inside the cells that make energy. This is our cellular energy for all those things to happen inside our bodies, inside our cells, inside our organs, inside our tissues. So mitochondrial dysfunction could be some sort of deficiency in energy, and that could be your day-to-day energy, but that also could be the internal energy of how your cells go through their metabolism throughout the day. And the mitochondria is where a lot of this oxidative damage happens. So we were talking, Dr. Downey was talking about how that oxidative stress is like rusting. So as our cells go through the production of energy, they have to use oxygen and they have to go through oxidation, but it's a controlled oxidation. So and we should have in our system upregulation of antioxidants and the ability to quench or quell this damage that happens so that it doesn't get out of control, so that it stays controlled. However, sometimes that doesn't happen because of lifestyle, because of toxic exposures, because of nutrient deficiencies. There's all sorts of reasons, genetics, why it might be difficult for this to happen in this tightly controlled system. And so the mitochondria are a site where some of this damage happens, and then we don't get that intracellular production of energy the way that we really ideally should. And then things really begin to kind of domino effect and snowball from there to break down throughout the system. So toxic exposure, there are several toxins in this test that are measured directly. And when we get to those pages, I'll point those out. So There are many toxic exposures we have. This is not a test for all of those, but this does test for a smattering of toxic exposures. And then the need for methylation. So methylation is a biochemical reaction that happens in our bodies, and it's a necessary thing that happens for many biochemical processes to go forward in a healthy and usual fashion. It's in the liver detoxifies everything, our metabolic waste, the foods that we eat, any exposures that we might have to anything inside or outside. And one of those necessary steps of detoxification is methylation. And there are certain B vitamin cofactors we need to have that happen. And it's important for our DNA and our genes. It protects our DNA and our genes. And it helps our neurotransmitters, and those are made in a number of places in the body, but usually we think about the ones that are made in the brain and how they affect mood and cognition and brain function. It's also, methylation itself is a major antioxidant system, and it helps control this oxidative distress, and it cools down inflammation. Defects in methylation are highly associated with mental and neurological disorders. So this is a very important step to know that we do well in our system. So the next page is Biology 201. It's the Krebs cycle. And this is where our foodstuffs, fats, carbohydrates, proteins, all come in, where we ingest these. And they go through these steps. They go through that citric acid cycle. And in that citric acid cycle is where they're broken down, and then energy results as a consequence of this cycle here. And a lot of so now we're starting to see some of those individual tests. So when you see things like pyruvic acid, lactic acid, citric acid, etc., those are some of the tests that are done. And they don't mean much by themselves. You know, our cis-cationic acid level doesn't really mean very much by itself. But if we see this Krebs cycle, if we see some of these high, if we see 2 or 3 or 4 in a row where the number is high, that means that cycle isn't going. It's dammed up or it's backlogged somewhere. And so things aren't going through the cycle, and we're not getting the energy production which happens at the bottom there. And it may be because there may be a cofactor. There may be a vitamin or a mineral or an amino acid cofactor that helps those steps of the cycle go. And if we're deficient in those, then those steps of the cycle will back up or dam up and won't go, and the cycle can't go and continue to produce this energy for us. There are also things in red, which are very hard to read, which are toxic substances, which can actually inhibit those steps. So we might not have cofactors that help it. We might have inhibitory factors in our system that stop it. It could be one or the other or both of those. So we actually can look at the cycle and see where might be some of the steps where things are not happening biochemically in a smooth and efficient fashion the way they should. Okay. Anything to add?
Well,
to that?
this time for an example, I don't know that you need to, if you just hold that briefly, Dr. Daly. So to give folks an example, if you look down in the right corner there's that alpha ketogluteric acid, and you can see there's a high level there. And the person seems to have handled the step fairly smoothly, where their citric acid was moving on down through, but then there's a pretty high level at the alpha ketogluteric acid, and then over there at, so you can see there's a little green dot left adjacent to it, and it shows B3, magnesium, and manganese. Those are elements that are meant to be in the system to help that alpha ketogluteric acid move on down and turn into energy for you. Just so we use a really, really concrete example, then this person might need a little bit more of that B vitamin or one of those minerals to keep that element moving on through.
Okay, and then these are some of that myriad of individual tests. So It's really more the pattern that is seen here. Some tests do mean a lot in and of themselves. Some are important and weighty, and they carry a lot of clinical importance. But a lot of these, actually, you look at all of them and some sort of pattern emerges from it. A lot of these are the tests that Dr. Downey was talking about, that to have, as our system goes through all these biochemical reactions that it goes through, there are intermediary steps and there are end product steps. And just like we saw in the citric acid, as things move through, we need all these cofactors. And so if we end up with, I think there's intermediary metabolites on the far right. So we're supposed to break these things down all the way. These are not supposed to really show up in any great amount in our urine. And if they show up in a great amount, you can see some of those on this sample patient are very high. If they show up in a great amount, it means that we didn't do those intermediary steps to break this stuff down. We shouldn't see these things. So whatever it takes to break those down into their final products, it wasn't happening in this particular patient. So a lot of those are B vitamins. They're even called B vitamin markers. So we already know this person has a greater than normal need. And they're essential nutrients, and then there are also things that we call conditionally essential. So in somebody at some particular time in their life, under their health conditions at this particular moment, they might have extra needs. And this test would indicate what several of those would be. So it starts over here with malabsorption and dysbiosis. So these are some of the ones that show digestion. Some of these things should be nice and low in the system. They shouldn't be showing up high. If they do show up high, it means that those processes did not happen in an efficient manner. So there's ones that will show whether we absorb nutrients from our food well or not. There's one that shows whether our bacteria might be disordered in our intestinal tract. There's a bunch of them that show whether we might have an overgrowth of yeast or fungus in our intestinal tract. We don't see these markers in large amounts in the body unless there's some imbalance like this going on. And you can see all of them have at least a couple of tests. So if the results for more than one test show up positive, that pretty strongly suggests that that is the pattern that is going on in this particular patient. So then we go into cellular energy and mitochondrial metabolites. So this is, again, where our energy comes from. This is powerhouses of the cell. And so we can look and see here. The next one is neurotransmitters, and those are those transmitters in the brain that help set a lot of the things with brain function. There's a variety of vitamin markers. Then we go into toxin and detoxification markers. So these, you can't read them that well, but these build up if there's certain plastics and toxins in the environment and gasoline additives that we see these actually go up high. And these are recent exposures, so we can tell if the person has had a recent exposure to some of those. The nutritionally essential amino acids and the non-essential amino acids. One of the first things we do when we look at this test is right in the center in the green there, we'd take a line and we'd draw a line all the way down the center, and we'd see what is the middle area of all of that. And then we'd see where do the results fall, because the patient's results are in the circle. So this patient, if you just kind of eyeballed it, you would say, yeah, most of those essential amino acids fall pretty much in a central line. So this person must eat enough protein, must digest their protein, has a pretty good balance of amino acids. Sometimes you'll look at this test and you'll see the preponderance of them are on the low side. Then either that person doesn't eat adequate protein, they don't digest adequate protein. So you can kind of get an overview by looking like that. So the essential ones are the ones that we can't make, we have to eat, and if they're not showing up on the test, it means we didn't ingest or digest them. And then the non-essential ones are ones that we can make from other amino acids. But again, these could be conditionally essential depending on who we are and how our health is. We may not be able to make some of these because maybe we don't have the essential amino acids to make them from. The intermediary metabolites are those B vitamin markers. And then the very last thing on the bottom right is markers for urine representativeness, which is a very interesting word. So this page is this page is all from the urine. So these are the things that should or should not show up in the urine. And so just to make sure that the urine arrived in good shape and we can really count on the results of this test, we can actually look at that and it will let us know, like this person got a 10 score, their urine arrived in good shape. We can count on that these actually are correct results here.
Good self-esteem booster.
Yes, yes. So, and then this page, these 2 pages are all on fatty acids. So there's some interesting things on here. I think this test is very interesting. So there's some interesting things on here. One of the most important things, and the first thing that we look at is in the center under cardiovascular risk, the very last one, which was the omega-3 index. This is probably the most important finding on the essential fatty acids. And this is the 2 omega-3s that are really important in our system, EPA and DHA. All you do is you take the number that's the EPA that they found, that they measured, and the number that's the DHA, add them up, and they should equal between 8 and 12. And this patient has 12.8, so they've got great omega-3. They've got a great index, which is just simply the addition of those 2 omega fatty acids, and this person has sufficient amounts. We often will see that this is on the low side. Yes?
How much would the results of this test vary from, say, week to week, depending on what you were?
They would vary. Yes, it would vary. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you have weeks where you eat a lot of fish, and then weeks and months where you don't eat a lot, it would vary. Now, this is stuff that's now in the blood. In fact, an interesting thing about this is, see up there it says RBC, so that's red blood cell. So with this, with a bunch of the rest of the tests here, the lab actually takes the red blood cells, opens them up, and sees what nutrients are inside the cells. So a lot of the standard labs like calcium and sodium and stuff are just what's in the serum. They're just what's in the fluid in the blood. These are actually inside the red blood cells. So these are things that not only got into the system, but got into the cells and live in the cells. So the red blood cells live for 120 days. So this does represent what's gone on for 120 days. So it's not just yesterday, but if there was, seasons of different diet, this would change if there were seasons of different. So we can also look at omega-9 fatty acids, which are olive oil, so we can tell how much olive oil somebody's having, and saturated fats, which is a really important marker. And under monounsaturated fats, the bottom one is trans fats, and I think we all know that trans fats aren't good for us and that we shouldn't be eating really any trans fats, but we can actually measure how many trans fats got into the red blood cells. So sometimes we get some trans fats in and we don't really realize, so we actually get a measure of what has happened over the last several months.
Where are those?
Halfway down the right column of page 10, under monounsaturated fats, it says trans fat.
I see.
And that lactic acid is the most common of the trans fats. So if one is going to show up, it's going to be that one. So then the other page just shows how certain fatty acids with cofactors can turn into other fatty acids. There's a number of essential fatty acids on here. So if we don't necessarily ingest every single fatty acid, our system, with the help of cofactors, which are vitamins and minerals and amino acids, the things that we've been measuring on all the pages up until this point, we can turn one fatty acid into another fatty acid. So you can also look at this page and see, well, if something is really blocked, see, is there an example of that? I don't necessarily see an example. We may see an example where one fatty acid is very high and the next one downstream, where those arrows go, is very low. So again, it's dammed or blocked up. And the reason would be, obviously we have the mother of the fatty acid that is the son or the daughter, but we might not have the cofactors that allow that transition to go from one to the other. Did you see an example? They're not necessarily, yeah. All right. And then the last page of the test is the oxidative stress markers. So what does that say? That says glutathione. So glutathione is a particular nutrient. It's a major antioxidant. It's probably the most major of the antioxidants. We make it in our system from amino acids and vitamins, and it helps break down, it helps quell or quench all those free radicals. It's anti-cancer, and it's a marker of the antioxidant status of the entire body. So it's very important to look at this. This one is measured directly, but then it's also measured functionally. On those first pages, we had a need for that, and that's from a number of different tests. But then we also measure it directly inside the red blood cell, so how much of it actually got inside the red blood cell. Then the next one is lipid peroxidation, and this is basically rancid fats. These are fats that have oxidized inside the cell, in the system. So this happens when we have sustained exposure with damage to the tissues. This is when fats are damaged by free radicals. So this is when that process has actually moved along a continuum and there is damage that has been done. We can see that, and then we take steps to correct it. And the next one is actually when that same sort of oxidation and damage has happened to the DNA in the cell. So it's one level even deeper, so we can see how long this has gone on, how deeply it's reaching into the tissues with this. And then the very last one under oxidative stress is coenzyme Q10, which is another nutritional powerhouse antioxidant. And this one really functions in the mitochondria. This is very important to keep the mitochondria healthy and working and providing lots and lots of energy for us. So it's very important in that whole energetic system. And elemental markers, and again, these are still inside the red blood cells. So on the left, copper, magnesium, manganese, potassium, selenium, and zinc are all directly measured. And there's a little graph to show where they happen to be. These are from the diet, these are from supplements, etc. So we can look at these directly. And then the toxic elements, so this is the other part of the toxicity that's measured in the test. And that's lead, mercury, antimony, arsenic, cadmium, and tin. And these are in the red blood cells, so this is what has been happening in the last 120 days that these red blood cells have been alive. So if you were high in mercury, it means in the last 4 months you were exposed to excessively high levels of mercury or cadmium or whatever it happened to be. These aren't old stores in the body. These are very recent exposures. So
Doctor,
that's the test.
calcium, was calcium in?
Calcium's not on here.
Okay.
There's just a few that for whatever reason are, aren't able to be measured in a clinically significant way.
Ah, okay.
Calcium tends to really be heavily protein bound, and so when you check it clinically, a lot of times you'll do an ionized calcium if the hospital has metabolic derangements. And so again, it doesn't mean that Genova couldn't have tested it, but even with a test that's this broad, there ends up being arbitrary decisions about which things they're going to look at and which they don't.
And the vitamin D, the usually don't have.
Oh, just on this test, D wasn't necessarily ordered, but if it was ordered, there would be a D level that would come on this. Yeah, that's an add-on. Costs $5 extra if you've got insurance. Yes?
Are there add-ons for hormone testing?
No, this is all just nutritional. This is just vitamins, minerals, fats, etc.
Does this
There are-
lab do hormone testing?
This lab does do hormone testing.
How
Yes.
much blood did they take?
Ooh, how much blood? Several tubes.
Oh.
Yeah, several tubes. I think it's 4 or 5 tubes. It's quite a bit. There's a lot of tests up here. It's not a gallon.
That's good.
Yeah.
So
Is there a place to
does
lay them?
SVT charge to draw then as an additional charge?
Sure, there's a draw fee, isn't there?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, there is a draw fee.
Yeah.
So it would be a doctor visit, draw fee, and a doctor follow-up visit would be
Yeah.
the additional charges besides
Yeah.
the...
Yeah. And you would definitely want the doctor to go over all this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can look at page 1 and you can say, yeah, I need some Bs and et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and one thing I do want to add to that is in tests that Dr. Downey and I have done in the past, one thing that's very interesting that shows up is that vitamins in particular, but minerals too, come in different forms. You know how there can be magnesium citrate or magnesium oxide, and B6 is typically just the typical B6. So we've done tests on patients where they may be getting enough nutritionally or they may be taking it, and yet we see their functional tests are low. And what has happened in a lot of those situations is that their system is not able to use the less absorbable or less bioavailable form of a nutrient, and what we need to do is switch them onto the activated or the easily absorbed or the bioavailable form of, say, a B vitamin that is used immediately without having to be changed or altered in any way in the system, and then that allows those functions to go. So maybe they've been taking a B complex, but it doesn't have the bioavailable or the active B vitamins, and so it really hasn't worked for them because of their particular biochemistry and physiology at that point. So that can be ascertained here too. So, if the question we're asking is, does your nutrient plan work for you? And it comes back and it says no, one of the reasons might be the forms. It might be the amount that you're taking, but it really might be the form that those nutrients are in.
I have a question about the forms. Now, recently I noticed they have vitamins that have all in it. They're like real food, and then there's the kind that's just like a white powder, like, say, for example, vitamin C. Do you recommend the kind that is from the real foods that say the real foods on it, or the kind that's just like a white powder that says it's,
Well, vitamin C actually is white.
right,
So,
ascorbic acid?
yeah, so I mean, it is going to be white no matter where it happens to be. So, I guess I'm going to answer that in just a slightly different way, and then Dr. Downey, if you want to answer that too. We believe that people should eat a good diet,
Right.
and that food should be the foundation of your nutrients, and that good exercise and good mental health and as much as you can do to foster a really good lifestyle, that is essential, that is fundamental. And then if, for whatever reason, that is not adequate, either because you can't get certain foods in certain seasons, or because you are at a place in your life, in your body, with your needs that you need more than can be provided with just food, where you need a sort of extra nutrition, or maybe there's a medical need to have something else, then what we like are professional grade supplements. And some of those are whole food, some of those aren't necessarily whole food, but they're professional grade so that they do have very specific amounts of those nutrients that are bioavailable to be used.
Because I know pertaining to forms, they say don't just go to the drugstore and get your vitamins, go to a health food store, because anyhow, they're pure or something.
Right.
But some of these with the real food, actually the vitamin C isn't even white. It's kind of, it says it's got strawberry, raspberry, and all these different things. So it's kind of this beige color. And you think, but heavens, they're so expensive, the ones with
Right.
the real foods. I think, my word.
Yeah, and if someone was going to go to the time, the effort, the cost of doing this, we feel like you'd want to use professional grade nutrients, because we would want to know that you were getting exactly what the label said, that there was nothing else added into them, and that it was the kinds and the amounts that were absorbable in your system.
So you'd be using like Thorn and Twin Lab and
Yes.
brands like
Yep.
that.
I should probably add a couple of layers, and again, this includes things that I've learned seeing patients with Dr. Daily over the years, but there are a whole bunch of layers to that question of quality of supplements, safety of supplements, and where they come from. And unfortunately, there could be a 3-day conversation about that too, but just a couple of things come to mind. One is that when we're making these references to professional grade supplements, a big part of what we're talking about is reputable companies, as you mentioned already. And specifically what that means is that the company can demonstrate to you that they've had third-party testing done to show the purity, and that what they say is there is actually there. And so one way somebody could get burned, for example, is if they were using herbs and the herbs had been grown in contaminated soils. Well, the benefit's no longer paramount, because the risk factor of the contamination in the herbs swamps out any benefit. But it gets more complex because your initial question was, is it better or worse to get a particular thing from its food source versus synthetic, is kind of the way I hear the question. And unfortunately, it varies from item to item. So two of the layers on that are that certain things work together in orchestration. So a lot of anti-inflammatories that are in foods are meant to work in concert. And an anti-inflammatory diet that's heavy in fruits and vegetables has all of these different things working together to quench inflammation. So when you say, okay, turmeric's an anti-inflammatory spice, and we're going to take the component of turmeric that's super anti-inflammatory, curcumin, and use that in isolation, and furthermore, we're going to make it bioavailable so your system just slurps it up and goes straight to fighting inflammation. A move like that is a really powerful clinical move, but what it does is it takes that natural item and it moves it toward a drug-like effect, a drug-like approach. And even that's not entirely fair because curcumin is curcuminoids. It's a little itty-bitty orchestra of things that work together in a neat fashion. But folks that are doing a lot of natural integrative medicine, what they have in the back of their mind all the time is, do I want to get the most advantage out of these things working together in their natural form? Do I want to sort of get more punch at the cost of losing some of how it works in its native fashion? So I don't know if that's helpful at all. And then, finally, Armour Thyroid is a great example of where synthetic might be better in some people's minds, because that's the example I always bring up. There's a tendency for those of us to love natural medicine to say, well, natural is always better. Well, Armour Thyroid comes from pigs that are raised by the same company that brings you bacon and ham. And I prescribe Armour Thyroid, and, I'm sorry to pick on them, but I mean, these aren't volunteer pigs that have been frolicking in, green fields getting to meditate every day. They have tough living conditions. There's a source of natural animal thyroid that's more humane, nature thyroid. And then there's synthetic levothyroxine and T3. It's made in a lab in New Jersey. I don't have a problem with my patients using a purified, FDA-approved synthetic thyroid hormone. And sometimes when I talk with people who are really natural, excited, and they hear where Armour comes from, it's sobering for them. Vegans are going to often go synthetic. So it's really humbling to me the more I learn that there's a bunch of shades of gray in quality and origin of supplements. If you look at just the medical utility, the ideal way to do the test would be to do it once, do the intervention, and then, if the person feels great and their plan is affordable and convenient and safe, maybe they don't need it again. But if they feel like, well, 4 of the 5 things I was interested in getting better did, but I'm wondering if everything is just right, go ahead and do it again. And I don't think Medicare would object to that. I think if Medicare saw me ordering 10 of them per year on 10 of my patients, I'd hear from Medicare.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering too. I mean, does it indicate what you have, like your body just has difficulty assimilating some of this stuff, or is it like a snapshot of your current health the way it is? Is it...
Well, to give you an example, 2 examples actually. If you say that you look at the parts of the test that check what your B6 is doing, so that energy production in the cells, etc., it might be that you happen to be somebody that doesn't turn B6 into its active form, which is P5P. Or maybe you don't get enough B vitamin rich foods. And so the interventions would be to get more B rich food, or just pick a good quality supplement depending on who you are and what you want to do. And even though it's a little hard to believe, the fancy scientific stuff about the energy production in the cells and that clinical experience of people saying, gosh, I feel energized, I feel terrific, those two actually do run hand in hand in my experience. I certainly won't speak for Dr. Daly, but that's what's made me fall in love with having a bigger toolkit than just my MD toolkit. Because I certainly can tell you, nobody in medical school or residency said, hey, Rob, if you use lisinopril to bring that person's blood pressure down, they're going to come back and say, I feel like $1 million. And that's my frustration with mainstream medicine, is these drugs that I have so much training in are laser targeted at one part of a physiologic pathway. And often they're meant to sort of dampen, inhibit, block, etc., certain move. But the price of that karate chop is that it isn't sometimes terribly elegant. And again, in mainstream medicine, it's relatively rare for the person to come back and say, oh, by the way, doc, when you fix such and such, these other things got better as well. Whereas in vitality-based clinical interventions, when you use omega-3 fish oil, for example, again, this test could show that the person doesn't have enough omega-3 fish oil, and they say, oh, by the way, doc, my osteoarthritic joints hurt. So you put the omega-3 fish oil in place to calm down the inflammatory discomfort of the pain, and then they come back and say, I've got better energy, my mood is better, I'm sleeping better, and my color vision is sharpened up.
Yeah.
Right.
It's spillover benefit into other pathways. So that's part of what's sort of key to know about this testing, is a lot of what makes it fun and dynamic and really interesting to people is that they do the test, they then try the supplements kind of at the doses or the natural sources of these things at the amounts on page 2. And a lot of them kind of have a wow experience of just feeling really vital. Or maybe they find that they get off of sort of a roller coaster where their day feels sort of wired and tired, and suddenly they've got level energy all day. So
That's good, I mean, because I was so focused on the test itself, I forgot to consider, what the benefits I would feel, for instance, by changing certain things, and then what you guys would do as far as evaluating, what the outcomes would be, so.
this test, more than any other, is loaded with trees. And so if you don't talk about the nature of the forest, you just get lost in this test.
That's great. I had one other question about it. My mom's on Medicare in New Mexico. So if I would like her to do this, then how would I know who does it?
The easiest thing to do would be to go to functionalmedicine.org.
Okay.
And they have a list of providers around the country, and they actually break it out into how many years of experience they have or whether they're certified in functional medicine. And people can get certification if they're an MD, but there are doctors of chiropractic who are functional medicine trained, and there are naturopathic doctors who might be available to the person or covered by insurance, and they're on that list as well. But it's by region, so you can do a search for who's near you and how they're where they fit into the functional medicine group. And of course there's other folks that get these tests too, so they don't have to be on the functional medicine website, but the easiest way I know of to find somebody near where that person lives. And I suppose maybe Dr. Daly knows of lists of naturopathic doctors.
Yeah, you can find naturopathic doctors, again, by zip code and by region, through the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And if you just put that in, I'm sure it's a .org as well.
Well, and that brings up a question about naturopathy versus functional. Would you go to a different doctor depending on what your issues are of the two?
Well, you would go see who's in your community first, and whatever is available. And that's something that's just really terrifically wonderful, I think, about SVT, is that we include so many different kinds of medicine and healthcare here, seeing the value in all of them. And there are some things that we do that are very, very much the same. There are some things that Dr. Downey does that I don't do. And there are things that I do that he doesn't do. But there's so much that we share that we do. So And then we refer to one another, or we refer to other people, within here or within the community that we think their expertise and their skills would fit the needs of what that person needs for their total health care. So, some of it is what's available. If there's a naturopath in your area and if your insurance covers that, then that's where you might go. But if there's not, and there's a functional medicine MD, then that would be a choice that would, be in your community and be available to you.
Okay, great. That's the way I look for it for her.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's a good sign when healers of any stripe feel that they don't have a monopoly on the truth.
Yeah.
And that they recognize other healers in the community who have value. Mm-hmm. And one of the bias that's become really strong for me is that every single arena, whether it's a car mechanic or a gardener, a custodian, neurosurgeon, Chinese medicine acupuncturist, every single category has people that are gifted, and every single category has some folks that are lost. They probably should not have ended up doing what they're doing. And it's really, really sad to me that a lot of dialogues about sort of MD versus other types of care are these sort of stories about who's right and who's not, etc. But in my career, I've got MD heroes, I've got naturopathic doctor heroes, I've got chiropractor heroes, Chinese medicine acupuncture heroes, and unfortunately, I've got a few villains in each category as well. I mean, I've done it long enough. So I just think that person really needs to have a good reputation. Mm-hmm. And just like, if somebody's going to get martial arts instruction, you don't talk to the sensei, you talk to the students, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to work with any healer, they should have an impeccable reputation in their community.
I just wanted to point out this last thing that we brought up is just shows some of the tests, like we can look under energy production, that citric acid cycle. So this is part of kind of how the provider thinks about it. And when we call Genova and we ask for their help, this is part of how they think of things to help us. So citrate, if citrate is high, you might use an amino acid arginine. If isocitrate is high, you might use lipoic acid or magnesium. So this is where you look for those patterns, and those patterns were embedded in all those myriad of tests, because who would ever imagine that low succinate needed isoleucine? I mean, those two things, they don't just intuitively go together. If you had low vitamin A, yeah, you'd use vitamin A. But so many of these are markers that are the forest rather than the trees. So these are the individual trees here, but this is where we can look at and see what does that pattern suggest to us? Where are those needs that we need to fulfill in that person?
And then after you take the recommendation and work on it, do you just have a specific test that targets that done to see if it works, or do you go back and have the whole test?
Yeah, and again, sometimes we don't always repeat this test because it is a big deal test and it's a very expensive test, and sometimes it's not necessary. When the person comes back and says, yeah, I feel great and pretty much everything's taken care of, you could do the test, to prove maybe in some other way. But if the person comes back and clinically they're doing very well and they feel good on those supplements and they can afford and continue to do those supplements for a while, then you keep them on it until you're pretty sure that those changes are consolidated and set within the system. Some things, and we would use our clinical judgment and our knowledge of the person, some of those things we might identify as lifelong needs because of who you are. Some of them might be temporary needs to get you into a better state of health, and then they don't need to be continued. So they can be retested, but a lot of times we don't find that you need to retest it.
The other issue that's kind of different has to do with lab testing and batching things. And so just to give you an example, at South Peninsula Hospital, if I independently ordered a sodium, a potassium, a blood glucose, blood urea nitrogen, creatinine, bicarb, each test alone costs a certain amount, and once you've got 7 of them, the cost goes through the roof. But if you batch them as a basic metabolic panel, you get this bundled cost. So with the NutrEval, if we contacted Genova and said this person wants their isoleucine and their cis-aconitate and their lipid peroxides retested, you wouldn't have to have many a la carte offerings before your cost would go right off the chart. You might as well just do the NutrEval again. So I think probably the big picture question is, if the clinician or the patient wants to be retested, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. It just so happens, though, that the clinical trend seems to be that most patients that do the NutrEval seem to sort of graduate. And what I mean by that is a lot of folks that do this test tweak their food and supplementation plan, etc. And then you don't seem to see them again for the problems that generated them wanting a NutrEval, which is kind of again good news that it's pretty high yield just on a one-time basis.
That's one more question. So what percent maybe of people who have this test done get a result saying everything's fine?
What percentage?
Pardon?
Did you say what percentage come back and say everything's fine?
Well, and when they get the results say you really don't need to make any changes.
Oh.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. Never seen that happen. I mean, we wouldn't do this test on somebody who probably didn't have things to be worked on, and who has, I mean, really, who has a perfect diet, you know? I mean, who has perfect food choices all the time and perfect health all the time? So we haven't seen it happen.
I have a question. I know a number of senior citizens who just don't sleep really well. Would this test show some things that the person might need to sleep better, or is that a whole different thing?
The neurotransmitter parts
Part of it
that
would.
look at how the central nervous system signaling molecules are kind of working, how they're being built and broken down and all that stuff would definitely be related to quality of sleep. And
And the B
what have
vitamin
you.
markers as well, and some of the minerals actually do help promote good sleep.
I will relay that information.
like magnesium.
Magnesium.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other questions? I'll stick around a little, and then if anybody wants to actually look at the report, feel free. And thank you so much
Thank you.
for
That was awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.